This is the tight end pyramid of greatness, and today we're building one. So I've already done my quarterback, running back, and receiver pyramids, but if you're new to the format, it's simple. Players are arranged in a pyramid, with the largest tier at the bottom and the smallest at the top. As you move upward, the names become fewer, and the standard becomes higher. And to even be considered for this pyramid, a tight end must be universally recognized as at least one of the 50 greatest to ever play the position. If you're not in that discussion, you're not even in contention for the base tier. Simply put, this is just a clean way to lay out the greatest tight ends of all time. But what makes the pyramid more unique than a traditional ranking is that it forces you to think in tiers. Instead of pretending there's some massive difference between, say, number 4 and number 5, it groups players into levels of greatness. Is Rob Gronkowski greater than Travis Kelce? What about George Kittle versus Jason Witten? That really comes down to who you ask, and what you value. Peak? Longevity? But still, I'll be splitting hairs and ordering these players in the way that I believe is most accurate, fair, and defensible, which was the most challenging of any position yet, given how tight end usage has evolved throughout the history of the NFL. Nonetheless, I'll be breaking down every single name, explaining exactly why each player landed where he did. So here's the formula for evaluating this position. First, I believe it still makes sense to value peak more than longevity when it comes to tight ends. But tight ends do tend to age a bit more gracefully than running backs or receivers. Their game isn't quite as predicated on speed or explosiveness. It's route running, physicality, finding space, and blocking. As long as they're healthy enough to be on the field, the all-time greats, guys like Tony Gonzalez, Jason Witten, or Antonio Gates, produce well into their 30s. In the end, this comes down to a mix of talent, peak performance, accomplishments, aura, the overall body of work, and honestly, my gut feeling. Not even I will follow my own criteria to an absolute T. In some cases, a player is where he is because it felt right, and I think that's the way it should be. But if you're watching this and feeling like I unjustifiably left someone off, don't worry. Once the pyramid is fully built, we'll cover some very talented guys who were left on the outside looking in, as well as some rankings you might take real issue with. So with that said, the third rule of this pyramid is simple. For every tight end you believe deserves a spot, you must also be willing to cut someone else. It's very easy to say this guy should be on the list. It's much harder to say who he replaces. We have limited spots, so every addition comes with a cost. The fourth factor, and by far the most complex, is era. Era plays a massive role in the tight end's legacy, but it's almost impossible to account for perfectly. Modern tight ends are faster, stronger, more explosive, and are perhaps the most athletic position in the NFL when it comes to their combination of size, speed, and strength. Furthermore, tight ends are used far differently today than they were 50 years ago, making the stats difficult to compare. And finally, the fifth point. No one will agree 100% with this pyramid, but that's the point. Ranking greatness is meant to create conversation. What feels spot on to one person will sound ridiculous to someone else, especially when you're ranking tight ends, a position that has changed so much throughout the years and is affected by variables like QB play and offensive scheme. So feel free to put your own pyramid in the comments. Let me know who you'd move up, who I missed, and why. So with that said, laying the foundation in Tier 5, we're starting off with Jay Novacek, the perfect tight end for a dynasty that didn't need him to be a superstar. Playing for the Dallas Cowboys during their run in the 90s, Novacek was the glue piece in an offense loaded with talent. While Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin got most of the attention, Novacek was stacking up Pro Bowl selections. He did a little bit of everything. He worked the middle of the field, sitting in soft zones, and sealed the edge in the run game. Just a 6th-round pick by the Cardinals in 1985, it took him until he was 29 to make his very first Pro Bowl. But from 1991 to 95, he made 5 straight to end his career, while winning 3 Super Bowls and even set a career high in yards in his final NFL season. Next is Dallas Clark, who was the star tight end for the Colts during Peyton Manning's prime in one of the most efficient offenses in NFL history. With Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne drawing defensive attention, Clark took full advantage. But after Harrison's retirement, in 2009, he put together the defining season of his career. catching 100 passes for over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, matching the production of Jason Witten and Antonio Gates that year. But that season also highlights the reason he lands in Tier 5, because outside of that peak, he was not some take-over-the-game type guy. He benefited from a system that elevated his strengths rather than being the kind of player who defenses spent the entire week game planning for. That doesn't mean he wasn't great, it just means there's a difference between being a perfect fit and being the reason everything works. Jeremy Shockey, one of the most volatile tight ends of the 2000s. Taken 14th overall out of Miami by the Giants in 2002, Shockey played the position with a fierce edge. At 6'5", 250 pounds, he had a dreamlike blend of size, physicality, and attitude. Even linebackers couldn't match his strength, and defensive backs didn't want to deal with him after the catch. He made the Pro Bowl in 4 of his first 5 seasons, including a 2002 rookie year where he was named first-team All-Pro. Shockey brought a level of intimidation that few tight ends have replicated since. But between injuries, inconsistency, and butting heads with coaches, he never quite maximized his potential, even as good as he was. He finished with over 6,000 yards, 4 Pro Bowls, 2 Super Bowl rings, and a reputation as one of the most talented but unpredictable tight ends of his time. Next is Delanie Walker, a late bloomer who turned himself into one of the best tight ends of the 2010s. Early in his career with the 49ers, Walker was more of a role player, a versatile piece who could line up all over the formation and contribute without being featured. But he never even hit 350 yards receiving in San Francisco. However, once he got to Tennessee, everything changed. With the Titans, Walker would become their #1 receiver. Whether it was Marcus Mariota or a rotating cast of quarterbacks, he was the guy they looked to when they needed a play. From 2014 to 2017, Walker averaged 900 yards a season, made 3 Pro Bowls, and outproduced every single tight end in the NFL not named Kelsey or Gronkowski. In an alternate universe, he just might end up in Tier 4, because he didn't truly get a chance to shine until he was 30 years old. And of course, he was overshadowed by the other all-time greats that were dominating at the very same time. Next up is Russ Francis, one of the more uniquely athletic tight ends of his era. At 6'6" with long strides and natural movement skills, Francis was more like a modern receiving tight end dropped into the 70s. He could stretch the field and make plays down the seam, which most tight ends simply weren't doing yet. And in his prime with the Patriots, he was one of the better offensive weapons at the position. He made 3 Pro Bowls and finished his career with over 5,000 yards. But we also can't overlook his role on one of the most memorable teams of the 80s. After coming out of retirement to play for the 49ers in 1982, he would ultimately help them win Super Bowl 19 against the Dolphins. The next player on Tier 5 is Riley Odoms, a player who, for a stretch in the 1970s, was one of the most productive tight ends in the game for the Broncos. He made 4 Pro Bowls and 2 first-team All-Pros from 1973 to 78, and was one of the best players on that first great Broncos team in 1977. Brent Jones, another player who, much like Jay Novacek, excelled in a dynasty. Playing for the 49ers during the late 80s and early 90s, Jones caught passes from Joe Montana and later Steve Young. From 1988 to 95, he made 4 Pro Bowls and won 3 Super Bowls. Next up is fellow 49er Vernon Davis. Coming out of Maryland as a top 10 pick, Davis was one of the most gifted athletes in the history of the tight end position. 6'3", 250 pounds with 4.3 speed, elite strength, and a 42-inch vertical. The definition of a mismatch nightmare. And after a modest first few years, Davis became a true game breaker, winning vertically, outrunning linebackers, and overpowering DBs after the catch. No one had his size and speed. In 2009, he went for 965 yards and caught a league-leading 13 TDs. But his most iconic moment came in the 2011 divisional round against the Saints, when he caught the game-winning touchdown, also known as the Catch 3, which capped off one of the most memorable finishes in postseason history. This video is sponsored by Arena Club. If you're into sports cards at all, Arena Club is one of the coolest platforms I've used. When I was a kid, one of my absolute favorite things to do was to go to Walmart and get packs or a box of cards. I didn't care who was on the card, I loved them all. I'm sure many of you can relate to that, and Arena Club lets you relive that feeling through slab packs, which start at just $25. And inside these slab packs are real graded cards, which can be worth up to 20 times the amount of the pack itself. One click and the card is instantly revealed and added to your showroom. So let's rip one. Okay, so we are on Arena Club. I'm looking at all the slab packs, as you can see. There are different tiers. We have Legendary, Diamond, Emerald, but what I'm going to be ripping is the Ruby, and of course, I'm going to be doing Football. And within these slab packs, what I like is this checklist that they give you, which shows you every possible card you can get. You have a few different grails, so if you get one of those, it's basically like you just won the lottery. Chase is the next best tier, and then most likely what I'm going to get is one of these lineup cards. Okay, I'm about to rip this pack, see what we get. Lamar Jackson, all right. I mean, I can't really complain about that. Let's see what it's worth. I can vault it, or I can sell it. Not the greatest season for Lamar last year, but I have every reason to believe coming into 2026 healthy, we're going to see a rejuvenated Lamar Jackson. However, I did go ahead and sell that card. You want to know why? Because now I can use that money to go buy more packs. So if you want to rip packs, you can go on to Arena Club right now and get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/Kai and using code Kai. That's arenaclub.com/Kai, code Kai. Now let's get back to the video. Now, before we continue, as I mentioned earlier, I am trying to order these players in the most accurate way possible. But because they're in the same tier, you can reasonably make an argument for just about any one of them over another, at least within a few spots. Think Jeremy Shockey should be ahead of Delaney Walker? Fine by me. Now for the top 4 tiers. Kicking off tier 4, we have Greg Olsen. After beginning his career in Chicago, Olsen's production really leveled up in Carolina with Cam Newton, when he was able to operate as the team's top target for a few years following the departure of Steve Smith. From 2014 to 2016, Olsen recorded 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons and made 3 Pro Bowls, establishing himself as one of the league's best. But the reason he lands at the bottom of tier 4 comes down to peak. He was never truly in the conversation for the best tight end in football, and he didn't have the kind of eye-popping stretch that pushes players into the tier above. Still, he was a model of consistency and longevity. Next up is Mark Andrews, the best receiving weapon of the Lamar Jackson era. He was one of the most efficient tight ends in the NFL for the first few years of his career, leading to 2021, when he was the best tight end in football. He led the position with over 1,300 yards, scored 9 touchdowns, and was named first-team All-Pro. Despite him now being past his prime, and it also being fairly easy to just look at his numbers and think he's too high, keep in mind that Baltimore is not a high-volume passing offense. They've wanted to run the ball as much as possible for the entirety of his career, and have typically been dominant enough to do exactly that. Jimmy Graham. Right or not, Jimmy Graham was being put in the same sentence as Rob Gronkowski for a few years. At 6'7" with a basketball background, when Drew Brees threw it up, it was his. From 2011 to 2014, Graham put together one of the most productive stretches by a tight end in NFL history. In 2013 alone, he caught 16 touchdowns. Not only that, but during this 4-year span, he led every tight end in yards, receptions, and touchdowns. He was essentially a wide receiver playing tight end, but that also ties directly into why he lands in tier 4. Because while his receiving ability was elite, his game was highly specialized. He wasn't a complete tight end in the traditional sense. As a blocker, he was limited to say the least. And once he left New Orleans, the production and overall impact began to dip. But I don't want to penalize him much for that, just given that I think he was clearly a special talent, and his decline came at a perfectly reasonable age for a guy with his physical build. Next up is Zach Ertz, who was the top possession tight end in the NFL during the late 2010s. In Super Bowl 52, he caught the game-winning touchdown against the Patriots, and in 2018, he broke the record for tight ends with 116 receptions. But blocking was never his strength either, and even though he stuck around for many years past his prime at this point, padding his career totals, no one would ever describe him as unstoppable. unlike at one point Mark Bavaro. Playing for the Giants during their golden age of the 1980s, Bavaro was a central piece of a team that won 2 Super Bowls. In Super Bowl 21, he went for 50 yards and a touchdown. But if you want the play that defines him as one of the toughest tight ends of all time, it's the one against the 49ers in 1986, when it took 7 defenders to bring him down on a 31-yard gain. That's who Mark Bavaro was. He was named a first-team All-Pro twice and even finished 6th in MVP voting in 1986. But his prime ended after his age 25 season, and he only logged 4 seasons over 500 yards, which is why he's not in Tier 3. So that concludes Tier 4, but the fun is only about to begin with Tier 3, which is a very odd one because generally, each tier will have fewer players than the last. But with the way this position shakes out, only 5 ended up in Tier 4, while 11 will end up in Tier 3. Beginning with Keith Jackson, one of the most complete tight ends to ever live. Jackson was both an elite blocker and receiver. Plus, he kicked off his career with 3 first-team All-Pros in his first 3 seasons, the best in the game at that time. He finished his career with over 6,000 yards and rode off into the sunset after a Super Bowl win with Brett Favre in Green Bay. Next is Todd Christensen. In the mid-80s, Todd Christensen and Marcus Allen were terrorizing defenses for the LA Raiders. From 1983 to 87, he made 5 Pro Bowls and led the entire NFL in receptions not once, but twice. And beyond the stats, he has 2 Super Bowl rings, playing a key role in one and being a face of one of the most successful runs in Raiders history. Charlie Sanders. Playing his entire career with the Lions, Sanders contributed to the tight end evolution in the 70s, and his resume is the best thus far. He's a 7-time Pro Bowler and 2-time first-team All-Pro, so clearly one of the best tight ends of his decade. And he wasn't merely a smooth 6'4" receiver. He blocked and played the position the way it was meant to be played at the time. Next up is Ben Coates. Wearing number 87 for the Patriots in the mid-90s, Coates was basically Gronk before Gronk, a massive target at 6'5", 260 pounds, who could bully defenders and consistently win in traffic. And his numbers for that era, they jump off the page. He was one of the best weapons in the NFL at any position. From 1994 to 98, Coates made 5 straight Pro Bowls and 2 first-team All-Pros. In 94, he caught 96 balls for nearly 1,200 yards, and he played a major role in helping the Pats reach Super Bowl 31. Arguably the best player on the team at that time, and one of the more under-discussed great players of the past 35 years. Jerry Smith. Drafted in 1965, you certainly won't hear Jerry Smith's name come up much in modern conversations either. But he was a first-team All-Pro twice, and at retirement held the all-time record for touchdowns by a tight end. He's extremely difficult to rank given that he played 60 years ago, but when you factor in his production relative to his time and the role he played in advancing the position, Jerry Smith has a very strong case as one of the more important tight ends in NFL history. Next up is Pete Pihos. Playing for the Eagles in the late 40s and early 50s, Pihos lined up as an end, but in reality, he functioned a lot like an early version of a modern receiving tight end. From 1953 to 55, Pihos led the entire NFL in receptions 3 straight years, receiving yards twice and touchdowns once. He was a 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time NFL champion, and is one of the most iconic two-way players, also playing D-end. Jackie Smith. Playing virtually his entire 17-year career with the Cardinals, he made 5 Pro Bowls and finished his career with over 7,900 yards, retiring after the 1978 season as the all-time tight end receiving leader. Dave Casper. Nicknamed the Ghost, Casper was the Raiders' star tight end before Todd Christensen came along. At 6'4", 240 pounds, he had the physical tools to handle the position, but what really set him apart was his feel for the game. Casper made 5 straight Pro Bowls from 1976 to 1980 and was named first-team All-Pro 4 straight times from 76 to 79. And when the moment got big, he showed up. His legacy is tied to 2 of the most iconic plays in NFL history. The ghost to the post in the 1977 playoffs, a deep corner route that set up a game-tying field goal to force overtime, is one of the most famous plays ever by a tight end. Then in double OT, he scored the game-winning touchdown, finishing that game with 3 scores. After winning 2 Super Bowls with the Raiders, he continued producing in Houston and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2002. Next is Ozzie Newsome, who helped redefine what tight ends could do as receivers. He was the second best tight end of the 80s and finished his career with over 7,900 yards, all of which came with the Browns. At 6'2", he wasn't the biggest, but his hands and clean routes made him incredibly hard to defend. He made 3 Pro Bowls and was named a first-team All-Pro in 1984. And he showed that a tight end didn't need to be an elite blocker to have a major impact on the game. Next up is Jason Witten, the definition of consistency at the position. Because while he was never the most athletic player on the field, for nearly 2 decades he was one of the greatest safety blankets in football. Playing 16 of 17 seasons with the Cowboys, Witten finished his career with over 13,000 yards and more than 1,200 receptions, placing him second all-time in each of those categories. But his game was never about flash. He wasn't out jumping or running away from defenders, but he understood leverage, how to position his body, and consistently found himself open. He made 11 Pro Bowls, 2 first-team All-Pros, and built a resume based on longevity and steady production, though he did have 4 1,000-yard seasons as well. Simply one of the most accomplished tight ends in NFL history. But rounding out Tier 3 is George Kittle, the most complete and violent tight end of the past 10 years. At 6'4", 250 with elite speed and explosiveness, Kittle has the physicality of a small offensive lineman while being able to move like a wide receiver. And that combination has made him one of the most problematic players in all of football for defenses. In the run game, he's as good as it gets, driving defenders off the ball, finishing blocks, and playing with a level of intensity that sets the tone for the entire offense. And then in the passing game, he can catch a short pass and show why he's one of the greatest tight ends of all time after the catch, or just burn defenders deep down the field and haul in a long pass. In 2018, he broke the single-season record for receiving yards by a tight end with 1,377. He's been a Pro Bowler 7 of the past 8 years, made 2 first-team All-Pros, and played in 2 Super Bowls. He's missed 24 games since 2019, so the one and only reason he's not in Tier 2 is durability. Because you could make an argument that prime for prime, he's the superior player to Travis Kelce. Speaking of Tier 2, it's time. Next up is Mike Ditka, one of the original prototypes for the modern tight end. From the moment he entered the league in 1961, he made an impact. As a rookie with the Bears, Ditka caught 56 passes for over 1,000 yards in 14 games, numbers that were unheard of for a tight end at the time, and was immediately deemed one of the most dangerous receiving threats in football. He made 5 straight Pro Bowls to start his career and was named first-team All-Pro twice. He was also a huge part of the 1963 Bears championship team. But what really makes Ditka's place on this list is how ahead of his time he was. Kellen Winslow Sr. Playing for the Chargers under Don Coryell, he was used all over the field. Split out wide, lined up in the slot, motioned across formations. He was one of the top receivers on some prolific Dan Fouts-led passing offenses. The 6'5" tight end led the NFL in receptions in 1980, then again in 1981, and had 3 1,000-yard seasons. But his shining moment came in the 1981 divisional round against the Dolphins, during the famous Epic in Miami, when Winslow caught 13 passes for 166 yards and a touchdown while playing through exhaustion, cramps, and injury. That game alone tells you everything you need to know about Kellen Winslow Sr. But he's not the greatest tight end in Chargers history. That title belongs to Antonio Gates, one of the greatest red zone weapons in NFL history. And what makes it even more impressive is that he didn't even play college football. He went to the Elite 8 with Kent State's basketball team in 2002, before averaging 21 points a game in 2003, and coming into the NFL undrafted shortly thereafter. Yet, Gates quickly turned himself into one of the best tight ends in history, building a connection with Phillip Rivers that would headline an era for the Chargers. At 6'4" with elite body control and great hands, Gates mastered the art of positioning. He didn't need elite speed because he knew how to box out defenders, create just enough separation, and win in tight spaces. He finished his career with 116 touchdown receptions, the most ever by a tight end. He also made 8 straight Pro Bowls from 2004 to 2011 and 3 first-team All-Pros from 04 to 06. One of the great non-traditional careers across all positions. Next is Shannon Sharpe. At 6'2", 230, he looked like a wide receiver and played like one too. While earlier tight ends helped push the position forward, Sharpe took it even a step further. Playing alongside John Elway in Denver, he was his go-to target in big moments. The 7th-round pick was the first tight end in NFL history to cross 10,000 receiving yards, and made 8 Pro Bowls while winning 3 Super Bowl titles, 2 with the Broncos and a 3rd with the Ravens in 2000. Next up is John Mackey. You've likely heard of the Mackey Award, given to the most outstanding tight end in college football. Well, that was named after John Mackey. Playing for the Baltimore Colts in the 1960s, he made 5 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros, and received MVP votes in multiple seasons. And he put his skills on display in Super Bowl V, when he caught a deflected pass from Johnny Unitas and took it 75 yards for a touchdown. He finished his career with over 5,000 yards and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1992. But the cornerstone of Tier 2 is Travis Kelce. For over a decade now, he's been the constant on one of the greatest teams in NFL history, and he was an All-Pro well before Patrick Mahomes ever came along. From 2016 through the early 2020s, Kelce put together the best statistical stretch any tight end has ever had, recording 1,000 yards year in, year out, stacking Pro Bowls and All-Pros while putting up numbers that resembled a true number 1 receiver. And then there's the playoffs. Every January when the stage gets bigger, so does his impact. In the playoffs, he has a 17-game pace of 121 catches, 1,400 yards, and 14 touchdowns, even greater than his regular season production. And his most iconic play of all, of course, the game-winning touchdown in overtime against the Bills in the 2021 divisional round. But that concludes Tier 2, which means it's time to cap off the pyramid with the final 2 names. The first of which is Rob Gronkowski. Unquestionably the highest tight end peak in NFL history. Because while others on this list dominated in certain areas, receiving, versatility, blocking, Gronk combined everything and turned it up to a level no one else has reached. He is both the best blocker on this list and a top 3 receiver. At 6'6", 265 pounds with speed, he was uncoverable. Too fast for linebackers, way too big and strong for any defensive back not named Earl Thomas, and had some of the absolute strongest hands in the league, especially in the end zone. But what truly separated Gronk was that, along with him being one of the most valuable receivers in the league, he was like having a 6th elite offensive lineman. He could line up in line and handle defensive ends, throw defensive backs into the stands, and completely change the way teams approached both the run and pass game. From 2011 to 2017, when he was healthy, Gronkowski was arguably the most impactful non-quarterback in football. In 2011, he had the greatest tight end campaign ever, with over 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns. He won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots and came out of retirement to win a 4th with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. Of course, the only real knock on Gronk is longevity. He was only 5 months older than Travis Kelce. Injuries limited the total length of his career, but he is so clearly the best tight end in NFL history at peak in my opinion, which is why I think he has to be in Tier 1. But because of his lack of durability, I think it's appropriate to have Tony Gonzalez alongside him, the gold standard at the tight end position. While Gronk had a higher peak, no one has combined consistency, durability, and elite receiving over a longer period of time. At 6'5" with a basketball background, he kind of popularized the whole tight end basketball player narrative that everyone has since become obsessed with. And Gonzalez did it for nearly 2 decades, finishing his career with over 15,000 yards and more than 1,300 receptions, both easily the all-time tight end records. He has roughly 1,000 more yards and 97 more receptions than Jason Witten. He made 14 of 15 Pro Bowls from 1999 to 2013 and 6 first-team All-Pros, the last of which came in 2012 when he was 36 years old. Year after year, regardless of the quarterback or system, Gonzalez remained one of the most productive players in the league. He wouldn't be number 1 if he was just good for a long time. He was great for a long time, and only missed 2 games in his entire 17-year career. So when you're building a pyramid of greatness at the tight end position, I still think it's the right move to grant Tony Gonzalez the number 1 spot. Now that we've completed the pyramid, I want to address some things that I think deserve a deeper discussion. First, Travis Kelce. I'm sure a lot of people will argue that he should be above Gronk or even number 1 all time, but mainly above Gronk. And I get it. When you look at his overall body of work, the consistency, longevity, rings, he's got it all. The case is absolutely there. He's been the engine of one of the league's great dynasties, but ultimately, I just don't think his greatness is truly on par with Gronk's. And to anyone arguing otherwise, I'll say respectfully that I think there's a bit of recency bias going on. Peak Gronk was a long time ago, so it's understandable, but man, there has never been a phenomenon like him at this position. The term gets thrown around, but he really did revolutionize it. When Gronk did what he did in 2011, people were literally like, what the fuck is happening? What is this guy? I'm a Vikings fan, and outside of 2012, I think that in general, he was a more valuable weapon to have than Adrian Peterson or Calvin Johnson at the time. No one could cover him, no one could tackle him, he was clutch, and he absolutely bulldozed defenders as a blocker. He was just a full level above everyone else on the field physically, and he was so unfair in the red zone. Gronk hasn't played since 2021, but would you be surprised to know that he still has 10 more touchdowns than Travis Kelce? For me, Kelce is firmly at the top of tier 2, number 3 all time. Another name I want to touch on is Greg Olsen. I think some people are going to feel like he's a little low. 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, multiple Pro Bowls, but this goes back to how I'm evaluating greatness. Olsen was incredibly consistent, but thinking back on his career, he was just never one of those guys. It's hard to explain, but you might understand what I mean. One of those tight ends who could just single-handedly destroy your defense. Even compared to Mark Andrews, he didn't have a season like his 2021. He never felt like he was on that level. And this is kind of random, but a current NFL player I think could have had just as great a career as Greg Olsen is actually Dallas Goedert. Goddard's career numbers are not nearly what they could be, because he was splitting time with Zach Ertz during the early portion of his career, and then transitioned into extremely run-heavy schemes while having to compete for targets with 2 of the best receivers in the NFL. Put him on the Panthers in the middle of the 2010s with minimal target competition, and I think he has a totally different legacy. Now for the honorable mentions. To be honest, unlike other positions, the names are not really that impressive. We're talking guys like Heath Miller, Todd Heap, Jared Cook, Algie Crumpler, and Wesley Walls, just to name a few. And truly, I don't even think it'd be crazy to put Trey McBride at the bottom of tier 5 right now. I know he only has 4 years in the league, but he's arguably the best tight end in football at this very moment, and just set the record for most receptions by one in a season. Either way, it's only a matter of time before Trey McBride and Brock Bowers end up on the pyramid. Eventually, I fully expect Colston Loveland, maybe Tyler Warren, and Harold Fannin Jr. It might sound like I'm being a prisoner of the moment, but we're entering a golden age for tight ends, not only in terms of talent, but also in terms of how offensive minds around the league are building their schemes around their stud tight ends. Colston Loveland wasn't fully unleashed until late in 2025, but once he was, Ben Johnson made him the centerpiece of his offense. So that, combined with how low of a bar it is to make tier 5 right now, means we could see a big shakeup of this pyramid over the next 5 to 10 years.